Hey guys, welcome back to Jess and Reads Romance. I'm Jessin, and today I'm here to talk about all the books that I read in September. Usually do a mid-month wrap-up. That did not happen this month. I also had big plans to do like other videos because it was my birthday month, but that never happened, and I'm not really surprised because this is my last month of being in my orientation phase of my new job, being a nurse, and I've been a hella stressed because I just had my last night shift where I'll have a preceptor that basically is my partner for the whole night. So I've been a little stressed. And of course, all the good intentions of making the videos just never panned out. On my off days, I was just like, I just want to wallow, and I just want to be alone, and I just want to read, and I don't want to do anything. So anyway, that's what I've been doing. So I have a couple of books to talk about. I'm mostly going to focus on the new books that I read. I think I read around 15 or 16 new books for September and then a handful of rereads. But I'm going to focus on the new ones since this might be a longer video. I tend to go off on tangents when I'm talking about books. It's hard for me to summarize. It's hard for me to summarize books because I want to talk about so many things. But I will try my hardest since I did not have a mid-month wrap-up. So let's kick it off with the first one, which is a historical, The Perfect Kiss by Anne Gracie. She has been such a great reading experience, especially since I feel like in, the most recent months, I haven't been reading a ton of historicals. And one of my patrons last month recommended The Perfect Rake, which is the first book of this series, the Meridew series. And it was just fantastic. So this is the last one, and it's the last sister, and Grace is traveling with her friend. Her friend has been betrothed since she was young, and she wasn't thinking that the betrothal would actually amount in like a marriage just because of the person who she was betrothed to. He's been like away on the continent. Nobody's ever really heard from him and stuff. But now her father's kind of forcing her to do it. She's nervous about it. She doesn't really want to do it. Her father's insisting that she get married to this guy. And so she tasks her friend Grace, or Grace kind of volunteers to disguise herself as her maid and travels into the wilds, like in the north with her, so that she's not alone. And hopefully try to find a way to figure out how she can help her friend not get married. And of course, so she's disguised. She like dyed her white blonde hair with like henna, and she like did some fake freckles with henna as well to like really kind of disguise herself as a lady's maid to Melly, her friend. So our hero, Dominic Wolfe, who Melly is engaged to, he's been away, and he has kind of like I don't want to say it's a tragic past, but his mother was married to someone who was much older than her, and he was a horrible man. He was abusive, emotionally, physically. He just flew off on tangents and stuff like that and kind of sucked the life out of his mother. And eventually the mom decided to run away, and she made her life on the continent, and she struggled for a long while. So Dominic witnessed his mother go through all those struggles, and so he kind of has a plan. Since his father has died, he's inherited this, estate that has been in his family for generations. He's just like, I'm gonna sell it. I'm not going to inherit this or restore this estate to its former glory because his father kind of ran it into the ground. Like, I'm just gonna sell it. So there's a lot of things that happen the night that he actually returns to his home, which he hasn't been there since he was a child. He finds that the estate is extremely neglected. Like, there's not even servants there, but he knows that there's been money that's been pulling out of the account to pay the servants to at least upkeep the house. And so something's fishy going on then. And also, like, not long after he's arrived at this house that has 0 servants, has looked like it hasn't been, inhabited in months at the very least, a carriage comes rumbling through, which is holding our heroine Grace and Melly and her father. The carriage driver was drunk, and he like basically kind of crashes. The carriage goes on its side in the driveway, and Grace is the one who leaps into action, and she's like banging on the door. She's like, help. She mistakes Dominic for just like a stable hand. He looks very like almost like pirate-ish. He has long hair, he's scruffy, and so he is like, who is this? So their first meeting, sparks are already flying, and she's a force of nature, okay? And then Melly, she's so sweet and unassuming. She's a little quiet and stuff. So of course, Grace captures the attention of Dominic. And this, I love secret identity tropes where the heroine or the hero has reason to hide their true identity if they're like an aristocrat or whatever it may be, even in contemporary, like just hiding that they're somebody famous. I love that. And of course, the situation is a little bit more complicated because Melly doesn't want to get married to somebody who doesn't love her. She doesn't want a family. She doesn't want to be forced to be married to somebody else. And Grace wants to help her friend, but they don't know how to get by this situation, especially whenever Grace and Dominic start, you know, kind of falling for each other. She kind of like spurs Dominic into like helping the estate, but more the people, the tenants that have been neglected have been suffering because there hasn't been a good manager. There hasn't been somebody who's given them jobs, and also the person who's been like swindling money from Dominic unknowingly has made life hard for the little villagers. And so anyway, Grace kind of like shames him into actually doing what he swore he wouldn't do, which is take up the title, take up the mantle as an aristocrat, and take his father's name and take over the estate. So anyway, I really like this romance. I thought it was really great. It wasn't my favorite in the series, but I still gave it 4.25 stars. So pretty good read. Then I decided to do a vlog where people would recommend me books, and I would just vlog about it, which was in addition to my normal Patreon books that I usually do. So anyway, the books that the spinner wheel picked for me were Maestro by Auden Dar and also Heavenly Bodies. I'll get to Heavenly Bodies in just a second. I ended up by DNFing that one, but Maestro is one of those books where it didn't work for me, but I see the appeal for other people. There was just lots of frustrating things that I don't vibe with. And it's also the type of angst that isn't my favorite, because the angst is more of a melodramatic kind of soap opera-y angst instead of something that intrigues me a little bit more, which is more of like a pining angst. And of course that's in there, but I think that the way that this romance drags on for decades was a little bit much for me, and the contrivances that kept them apart were a little bit too over the top, and I was just very frustrated a lot of the times with the characters and their decisions. So it wasn't the most enjoyable read for me, but it was really intriguing at first. I really did like the way that the hero and the heroine met. Both of these characters are musical, and they meet whenever they're about 13. They're going like to the same academy. Aurelia doesn't come from like an affluent background, but our hero Chadwick does, and they kind of click on the first day whenever they're auditioning to even go to the school. And they become best friends, and they truly are best friends for a number of years before it kind of like develops into something more. They always find each other attractive. Aurelia doesn't think she's attractive. Chadwick is absolutely gorgeous. And they date for a little while whenever they're teenagers before just shit happens. And Chadwick kind of is just like, hey, I need to focus on my music career. He's supposed to be a prodigy. His grandfather's pressuring him a lot to focus on his music career, not get distracted by relationships and stuff like that. So that all... It was pretty intriguing. I was frustrated with Chadwick because he's behaving like a teenage boy. So you know what? It was fine in the beginning. It was fine in the beginning. It's more when they're adults that I don't really love what happens. There's just lots going on. There's lots going on with like two-faced people and fake relationships and cheating and just like all kinds of like lies and blackmail. It was just a lot, and it just frustrated me to no end. So I ranted about that book for the majority of my like hour and 30-minute vlog. Like that took up basically the whole time, and I barely spoke about Heavenly Bodies or the other book that I ended up by reading after I decided to DNF Heavenly Bodies. Maestro is basically that whole vlog. I just could not stop ranting about the little things that bothered me and made this book a 2-star for me. But again, I do think that it is appealing for other people who are looking for that type of angst. Like, I understand that there are people who are like, this is what they're looking for. They want to feel that ache. They want to feel over the top frustrated with their characters. Like, that makes an exciting book for them, and it doesn't for me. And I know that about myself. So people still keep recommending books like this to me. So I don't know. I don't know if people like to hear me rant about books, or they truly just think that this will be the one to change my mind and this will be the one that I like, even though it's super angsty and melodramatic. I don't know the intentions behind recommending me books like this, but it happens a lot. And I don't particularly like raining on people's parades, so I don't intentionally pick up books like this if I know that they're going to be the type of angst that I know is not for me. So anyway, 2 stars for that one. I did not enjoy that reading experience, so there's no way that I can give it a higher rating, because I was like, felt awful after reading it. It just wasn't satisfying. Next, I picked up Heavenly Bodies by Imani Aru, and I was pretty excited about the premise of this, and also it being a fantasy romance. I just want to read more fantasy romances, especially ones that I haven't heard of before, or by authors that are new to me and maybe like just starting out or indie and stuff like that. So I was pretty excited about it, but I had a hard time being swept away in this story. It's not that I think that the beginning was slow. It It was fine. The introduction to Alara, who is our heroine, you know, escaping her country, seeking refuge in another country, asking the king of that country for asylum, and then kind of entering into this deal where she would train with his son. So Enzo is what I assume is the hero, but again, this is a series, so I'm not even sure if Enzo is the end game, but at least in this book, he is the love interest, so as far as I know. Again, I DNF'd it around like 30%, so I'm not quite sure what happens after that, but I think the background of Alara was fine. It was intriguing enough for me to continue with the story after the first couple of chapters, but once she was there and training with Enzo for just reasons, I just had questions about like the magic system, the powers that each character had, and just everyday life. And I was a little bit bored with the training sequences. I was just finding a hard time seeing exactly what was driving the story forward besides this attraction between Alara and Enzo for the moment. It felt like the bigger picture was being put off in order to allow Alara and Enzo to have this like enemies to lovers banter. Like it was like everything else paused while they were doing that. And I was just a little bit bored by it. So I didn't feel, after reading Maestro, I was just like, I don't want to put myself through another book that I'm just not enjoying. So I was just like, I'm not going to finish this book. And I DNF'd it. And definitely it being part of a series where I'm pretty sure it'll be like the same couple, or maybe even, who knows if there's going to be a love triangle in here. No idea what's going to happen after the 30% mark. But I tend to not like duets because sometimes I feel like authors just kind of drag it out to either make more money or just because they didn't plot it well enough. So I tend to not like duets, and I'm sure if this is a duet or if it's going to be a trilogy or whatever. So anyway, it just didn't interest me. It didn't interest me. I knew that it was going to have a cliffhanger, and I was just like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it. So 30% DNF. Next, I picked up Under the Stars. And this book by Laura Pavlov was recommended to me as a Grumpy Sunshine Opposites Attract romance, and I was like, you know what, I just want something simple. I just want something simple. I had attempted to read a Laura Pavlov before and I didn't really love it, but this one was working for me. I really loved Georgie. She was our sunshine character. She moved back to Cottonwood Cove, which is her hometown. She comes from a really big family who are all like, you know, in each other's lives, but in like the best possible way. Like, all intentions are good with her family. She just doesn't want them to know that she is having issues with her ex, who is being a big baby about them being broken up. He kind of stole her car and is holding it hostage. She's trying to interview for a job as an assistant. One thing leads to another. She ends up by getting the assistant position, and Maddox is our very stoic, grumpy hero. He does not want to be taken in by Georgie, just like bubbly personality, but she's the only one that can deal with him and his mood swings, and she just does not let him faze her. And I really like how Georgie lightens up Maddox, and that's what the appealing thing for me about Grumpy Sunshine is. I like a broody, stoic hero, and I like the way that a sunshiny character just brings out this lightness in the grumpy character. So it was just a really fun read for me. I really liked Georgie and Maddox together. I thought that they had great chemistry, and I really liked the story. I really liked her family, and I continued to read the series after that. Then we come to my Patreon picks. So my patrons recommend me books, and I put them on a similar spinner wheel, and I just select them to vlog about each month, which that vlog is exclusive to patrons. But I reread Tide, so that was picked for me, and I really enjoyed reading Tide by Carrie Cole. It has such an interesting premise. I mean, Torn and Tide are my absolute favorite books by Carrie Cole. They are my top tier, and nothing can touch them. Nothing that she wrote before that or after that has reached this level of just like, I love these books for me. And Tide has a scarred hero. There is a age gap too, but it's not really too much of a focus in this book. Like, you can absolutely put to the side that there is an age gap between these two characters because they have such a unique background that it's really not the most important element of the story at all. Our heroine, Holly, was kidnapped when she was 5 years old, and Tyler, our hero, discovers her in the woods when she's 16. And he had an incident years ago where he was badly burned. As a result, he became a recluse. He was like a golden boy. He was a jock, and all that kind of got ruined when he had an incident where he was burned. So now he kind of likes to scare people away as well. And when he is the person to find Holly in a hole in the woods, and then a man comes, which is the person who kidnapped Holly, Tyler ends up by killing him with his bare hands. This all happens in like the very first chapter. And people are suspicious of him. Like, what if he was the one to take the girl? Like, the person who he killed was like a family man, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't really stick. And a couple years later, after Holly was rescued, they end up by meeting again. And the way that these two connect, especially Holly's struggle trying to integrate with her old life again, with her parents who kind of don't know what to do with her, and Tyler, this town recluse who scares the shit out of everybody else, being her Prince Charming. It's just such a unique story, and I absolutely swoon for this story. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. These two unlikely people who find peace with each other is amazing, and I just love it. So that was a really great experience. And then I read Not So Lucky by Trelina Pucci. This also has, I don't want to say it's a unique storyline, but yeah, I definitely haven't read another book specifically like this. It is accidentally got married in Vegas whenever I was a little bit drunk. And it starts off with our heroine, Eleanor, doing the walk of shame the next morning and being like, oh man, I left my number for him. We'll get it annulled. It'll be fine. The problem is the hero of the story, Crew, is a famous NFL player and he needs like an image rehab. And there's also like a complication where he's leaving his former team, and the judge that they go to annul the marriage like is a fan of the former team and doesn't like Crew, the fact that he's leaving, and he said some things. So like he makes it hard for them basically to just get a quiet annulment, and he's like, you need to wait 30 days and then you can get a divorce, whatever. So part of the whole one night stand thing in Vegas was not only that Eleanor and Crew hooked up and got married, but she hooked up with his friends too. So this isn't like a polyamorous book, but she does have sex with his two best friends off page the night that they get married and in another scene as well, but she only ends up with Crew. So this is definitely a book that's more in the erotic category. I actually really like them together whenever it was just them, especially toward the end when they realized that they were having deeper feelings for each other, maybe they wanted to stay married and stuff like that. So I actually really like them together, and I just felt like the relationship with the friends, with the best friends there, added a bit of an unrealistic aspect to their relationship. If she ended up with all of them in a polyamorous relationship, I probably would have bought into it a little bit more, because I'm like, oh, this is straight up erotica and she's, you know, it's a poly relationship and that's fine. I want her to have a connection with all the heroes. But just having like casual sex with his best friends rang a little weird to me, because like, how do you have these people stay in your lives after you've slept with them multiple times? I don't know. Like, once you open that door, how do you close it? So like, it made Eleanor and Crew's relationship a little bit unrealistic to me, because I'm just like, how do you forget that? How do you forget that? Oh, I slept with your best friends and they've seen me naked now that we're together. Like, I don't know. It was just like, I'm not interested in reading books that have sex scenes for the sake of sex scenes and for the sake to be like, oh my God, this is so hot, so spicy. I've already made a video on that. And this is one of the examples where I was just like, obviously, this book wasn't written with the intent to showcase a polyamorous relationship and a heroine finding connection with multiple people. It was written for the explicit purpose of shock factor. So that kind of like brought it down for me. But I didn't dislike it. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. Next, I picked up Here With Me by Brooke Montgomery. Definitely a deciding factor in picking up this book, once Jen told me about it, was the fact that this is going to be a little bit taboo, because our heroine Noah meets this really hot older guy when she's at a rodeo. She is a horse trainer, and they kind of had like a one-night stand, and later on she discovers that the guy that she hooks up with was her ex-boyfriend's dad, Fisher, and they're estranged. Her ex-boyfriend and the dad are estranged, and then he ends up by working for her family's branch, and she just like, holy shit, and she didn't know when she slept with him that was her ex-boyfriend's dad. So there's that element to it, and I was just like, oh, I love a good taboo ex-boyfriend's dad or dad's best friend or whatever. Like, I like reading those. So I was definitely very intrigued. And overall, I definitely think that the characters had chemistry, but I had a few gripes about the way that the romance started and a couple of nitpicky things. So one of the nitpicky things that kind of really bothered me was the accents. I don't know, this sounds weird to say, but the accents in this book. So the author chose to phonetically spell out some words in a very kind of typical twangy Southern way. And it was to the point of being distracting to me. And the only other way that I can compare it to, like, it just was so over the top. If you've ever read a historical romance where there is a Scottish character And the author goes really hard on like the I's and nays and no's and, you know, being very Scottish in the dialogue. Like they almost go too hard and it's like just too much. And it's like if you just pulled back and use those things sparingly, it wouldn't be so distracting. Like it was just too much, you know? So that was like one of the aspects of it that I found highly distracting. I was just like, okay, we get it. They're Southern, like Jesus, like, pull back a little bit. And then the other thing that I thought could have been done just a little bit better was, okay, so the fact that Noah and Fisher have a one-night stand at the rodeo. It's very hot and it's like, probably never gonna see this person again. So it's kind of forced proximity. He's gonna be working for her family and she doesn't want them to know that they had a relationship. He doesn't want his son to find out because he does want to have a relationship with his son again, but they can't stay away from each other. And they have multiple conversations toward the beginning of the book like, hey, we have an attraction. We're not going to act on this. We're going to try to just be friends. They really don't try that hard to be friends. And I get it. Like the whole point is the fact that there's a pull between them that they can't resist. But I would have liked just a little bit more resistance from them in the beginning to like capitalize on this pining, this forbiddenness, like drag it out, make it a little bit more of a foreplay than being like, hey, we should totally just be friends. And then that same night, he like finger bangs her like on the counter or whatever. And I'm just like, I don't know. I wish that the author just like had a little bit of restraint whenever it came to this forbidden aspect, like, oh, we can't be together, and dragged it out a little bit more before they gave in and actually started sleeping together. Now this may be just a little bit of a spoiler. I felt like the pacing of the relationship was just weird. It was like one night stand, super hot and heavy, very dirty talk, very just like, you know, one night stand typical. You don't know this person and it's just you're having sex with this person just to have sex with this person. And then they have a secret relationship where they're like, oh no, we shouldn't, but then they do anyway, and it's very like, again, hot, secretive. And then they decide to not be together because she doesn't want their relationship to ruin his chances with reconciling with his son. So she decides like, we're really not going to be together anymore. She ends up by getting injured. And there is a wonderful caretaking scene toward the end of the book where they're actually trying to be friends and there's nothing sexual going on with them. And he's at her house cooking for her, helping her shower. Like he's just being very swoony. And I was like, I was missing that from the beginning of the book. And I just found personally for me, it was just the pacing was a little bit off and the progression of the relationship was a little bit off. But I did like their chemistry together. I really, truly did. And I will be reading more books in the series. But because of those little issues, I ended up by giving it 3.5 stars. Then I decided to pick up some more Anne Gracie's. I was definitely in the mood for some historical. So I picked up her Chance Sisters series. I still have one more to read, but I did read all three of these during September. The Autumn Bride. What an opener. This has such a unique beginning. Such a unique beginning. So our heroine Abby is a governess and she and her sister Jane were orphaned. They went to a school and Abby's been a governess for the past, few years. Jane is younger than her and she is about to basically, graduate from that school, and she's taking a position as a companion for like a vicar's mother or something like that. Well, long story short, she is taking her 1/2 day off and she is approached by this seedy looking individual. She looks like she's been beaten, and this woman is claiming that her sister Jane is in London and that she needs help now, that she's in a brothel. And she's like, what? But then the person who approached her, this girl that approaches her, has information about Jane that you have to have met Jane, known Jane to have this information. So Abby does go and she finds out that her sister was kidnapped and forced to be in this brothel. So she has to find a way to rescue her sister. She ends up by rescuing Jane with the help of the same girl, Damaris, and also another girl, Daisy, who is also kidnapped, comes with them as well. And they kind of make a pact to like stay together and protect each other. She gets fired from her job, or she leaves her job because they were not being understanding at all, not giving her a couple of days to figure out how to help her sister Jane, who is suddenly in London, and she didn't have enough money to help her. The family that she was working for were just pieces of work. So anyway, she was like, no, I'm gonna choose my sister over my job. We'll figure out a way to make it work. So the girls decide to stick together, and they have a plan that Jane is so beautiful, and so is Damaris, who was the other person who was kidnapped, and Daisy was the one who approached Abby to save Jane. They have a plan. Daisy can sew. She wants to become a dressmaker. Jane is beautiful and Damaris is beautiful, and if they go to Bath, they don't really have to have an introduction into society. They don't have to have like a sponsor, and maybe Jane can marry somebody and that'd be like the resolution to all their money problems, is Jane marrying somebody who's rich and also somebody who she actually likes. Like, they don't just want her to marry anybody, but it's basically their only hope. The only problem is they quickly run out of money and it's harder to get to Bath than they thought. Jane ends up by getting sick. They're staying at this like rundown place. It's about to be like torn down anyway. She sees across the street there's this house that every night she sees like, you know, a candle in the window, and the window's always open, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna have to do something because I need to save my sister. I'm gonna have to steal. I don't want to, but I'm gonna have to steal. She climbs into that window and she is confronted with this old lady, and her name is Lady B. She has been neglected. She looks like she hasn't been washed in days. The food looks stale. And Lady B's reaction to somebody just like climbing into her window is just so like nonchalant. She's just like, oh, have you come to steal stuff? Like, I'm sorry. I don't know if there's anything really left here. Everyone's forgotten me. My nephew has forgotten me. My friends don't come to call anymore. And, you know, my servants aren't really taking care of me. And Abby connects with Lady B. She doesn't steal anything from Lady B. She actually helps her eat, helps her drink and stuff like that. And she's so concerned with Lady B. She's like, I think maybe the servants are taking advantage of her. Long story short, they are. And Lady B is like, well, why don't you and your sisters come and live with me? And if you can get rid of the servants, if you can find a way to get into this house and get rid of the servants, like, I will house you. So they do. Abby and her sisters, her real sister Jane, and then her other, you know, sisters of the heart, barrel in, pretend to be relations of Lady B, and rescue her. And when I tell you, I was just so touched, and it was just such a heartwarming scene when they bust through and Lady B realizes that she's gonna be taken care of. Like, the girls give her a bath and they clean up her room and they just like make her feel so good. And it just like literally broke my heart, but it was so heartwarming at the same time. And then the hero of the story is Max, her nephew, who he inherited the uncle's title and estate, and it was severely in debt. And he really cares about his aunt, but he ends up by going away to the continent to kind of make his fortune. He's been corresponding with his aunt. It was really the servants writing as the aunt this whole time and sending back money this whole time, but he hasn't been back home in so long. But one of the aunt's friends writes to him being like, look, something fishy is going on. So he ends up by coming to London right when Abby and her sisters install themselves in Lady B's house. And so he thinks they're taking advantage of his aunt. And I just really love Lady B. She's such a matchmaker and she's just really funny. And oh my God, I love this book so much. It was so good. I loved it, loved it, loved it. 6 stars for me. I thought that this was a phenomenal romance. The second book is The Winter Bride, and this is Damaris and Freddie. So Freddie is Max's best friend. He's a bit of a fop. Like, he likes nice things and he doesn't really take anything too seriously. Very like the opposite of Max, who's very responsible. His parents are on him to get married. Damaris doesn't want to get married. She's actually the daughter of a minister or a missionary, and the way that she was captured and brought to the brothel was, father was a missionary in China, and her mom died and then her father died. She found passage back to London, but they actually sold her into slavery. They sex trafficked her. Damaris just really doesn't have an interest in getting married at all. She just wants to make a living for herself. She actually likes to paint pottery, so she's artistic, and she's been sneaking out of Lady B's house early in the morning to actually paint pottery. And Freddie, who is tasked with watching the girls while Max and Abby are on their honeymoon, figures out that she's doing this, and he's like, I can't let her walk around London and seedier parts of London at 3 a.m. and work. Like, what is she doing? But he starts keeping her secret, and then it turns into like this fake dating thing because he's like, I need somebody to pretend to be my fiance so my parents get off my back, and Lady B will stop matchmaking for you since you don't want to get married, and the only caveat is I need you to come home with me to my parents' estate because I only go back home once a year and you would be a nice buffer to have there. And I just really like the way that this relationship plays out because they really are two unlikely, like very opposites attract situation here. And Damaris truly does not want to fall in love or get married. Like, she just really doesn't have an interest in it. But the way that Freddie's parents treat him, because there is a background with Freddie, he was the second son and his oldest brother died tragically. and he feels a lot of guilt for that situation, and his family kind of blames him for it, and they're mean to him. And when Damaris is there, she sticks up for Freddie. Oh God, and it's so good. It's just so good. I love the way that she comes to his defense, and she's just like, you should not have to take this. Like, they should love you. They're your parents. Like, this is ridiculous. And I love the way that she stands up to his parents. It is fantastic. So good. So good. So I love this book as well. Gave this one 5 stars. Really good. And then the spring bride is Jane. So she's like the most beautiful. She is very interesting because Abby and Jane view their past a little bit differently, or at least they've taken different things away from their past experiences. Abby and Jane, when they were with their parents, who they were from aristocratic families, but their families kind of disowned them. So they were living basically in squalor. Abby remembers her parents being so in love and that being kind of like the thing that kept their family together, and she's very much romanticized her parents' relationship. And while Jane knows that her parents loved each other, she hated the way that they struggled, especially after her father died and her mother became ill. She hated not having a safety net. She hated being taken advantage of. There were people trying to steal Jane because she was such a beautiful child. So it was just a very terrifying period of Jane's life. So what she wants most of all is to have a husband and have security. Love does not come into it at all. She just doesn't want to ever feel like that again. Like she has nothing and no one to fall back on, and she doesn't want to live like that again. So it could be taken as a little bit superficial, but honestly her fear is so real that I just really was very intrigued by Jane. And she's such a tender, soft-hearted person. She loves taking in like these stray animals and stuff, and that's kind of how she meets our hero, Zachary Black. So Zachary Black is an aristocrat, but he has been working for the crown as a spy for like a long time, and people actually think he's dead. And the only reason why he comes back is because his cousin, who's set to like inherit if Zachary is dead, is claiming that he murdered his stepmother like the night that he fled home like years and years ago. So he's returned from like a mission like in Hungary, and he's kind of looks like a gypsy, and he sees Jane running into this alley because she's trying to rescue a dog who's being abused by these stupid boys, and he comes to her aid and helps her. And he is so like blown over by Jane, and they start having like these secret, not really secret, but meetings at the park every single day while this very rich, very proper man is courting her. And she feels like she has to accept this man because this is her opportunity. What if nobody else offers for her? What if somebody who's not as rich never comes along again? So she's very concerned with her future and it being a stable future, but she's also intrigued by this man who she feels like has nothing to his name, which is untrue. Secret identity. Again, I really love it. He has a lot of money, and he has a title. He just has to clear his name of murder and also fight his cousin for the estate and all that jazz. So I kind of really like the struggle that Jane goes through, but it also frustrated me as well, just because she's overlooking a lot of very like big red flags from the person who's courting her. And I'm just like, why do you think that she's convincing herself that this would be a happy marriage, but she's overlooking some things that would probably make her extremely miserable. It was kind of like a back and forth thing with me being frustrated with Jane, but also like being understanding about why her fears were holding her back from saying no to a man who was just not right for her. And she had other choices. Like this was literally the first man who approached her. So it's not like she'd even like, the season didn't even get started yet. She probably would have had many other offers, but she was so afraid that she would never get another offer that she felt like she had to accept the first one. And then she was falling in love with Zachary, meeting him every single day in the park when she knew that she shouldn't, and she would put her potential engagement at risk. So I like this one. I give this one 4.5 stars. It was good. So I just have one more left. It's Daisy's Romance, and I'll probably read that sometime during October. Next, I read Worth the Fall by Claudia Connor. Jen recommended this to me because she was just like, I know you love single dads, and this hero is the ultimate man who is good with kids. Like, I think you're gonna love it. And the premise is that our heroine, Abby, she has been recently widowed, and she has 4 kids, and she's pregnant. She's decided to take her kids, it's been planned for a while, to the beach. And our hero, Matt, is a Navy SEAL, and he's been injured, and so he's been forced to take leave. And so he's also on vacation as well. And that's how he and Abby meet, and he just connects with them. And when I tell you that these are like the cutest freaking kids, and the way that he just immediately is enamored by them, and he's just so good with them, I absolutely fell in love. It was such like a cozy, just like warm book. Very simple, very straightforward. Nothing crazy going on in the plot line. It was a very like soft romance, and it was just so freaking beautiful. It was just ooey gooey, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need that in my life. I don't need the most like crazy or interesting plot line. Sometimes I just like good people getting their HEA and throw in some cute kids there, and I absolutely love it. He comes from an extremely big family too, and she does not, and she's always wanted a family. Her ex-husband was very distant, and you can tell how much she loves her kids and they're like her life. And the fact that matches so good with her kids makes him very appealing, but you know, it's kind of a little bit of a long distance relationship. She doesn't know how it's gonna work. So she's hesitant. She's hesitant about this being anything other than a fun week that they've had together. They just spend together hanging out. And Matt's just not ready to let go, and I just love it. I gave this book 5 stars. I just did. I just loved it. Delicious. Then I picked up the second book in the series, which is Worth the Risk. This is about Matt's brother, Steven. He is a billionaire. Steven's not interested in relationships because his former fiance was tragically murdered, and he felt kind of a sense of responsibility in that situation, which it's a lot to unpack why he feels that way, and I won't get into that because it's, you know, a revelation that happens, you know, down the line. So he's in partnership with like this big, you know, he's in real estate, and Hannah has inherited this ranch, and the horses are used for therapy. But the problem is the people who she worked for who wanted her to take over, they didn't actually have like a will, so there's nothing really concrete about them wanting her to have the ranch. And there are definitely people looking to buy this property. One of the companies is Steven's company, and she doesn't know that. So there's a little bit of a secret going on with that. And while I thought that the romance was really sweet, and also Hannah also has like a tragic, she was kidnapped and tortured. So like there was just a lot of heavy stuff going on in this book, completely different from the first. The first book had a little bit of heaviness in it. Let's not say that it didn't, because it definitely did. Abby did have a tragic past. She went through some trauma, but Hannah's was a lot more, and so is Steven's. It was like a double whammy of trauma in this book, and it was just a little bit predictable. Like the villain was a little bit predictable. It was just okay. It was just okay, just not the same magic as the first book. So I gave that one 4 stars. And the last one is Worth It All, and this is the younger brother, JT. He actually had an accident. He was in a car accident, and he lost his leg. He went to a rehab facility in California, and he ended up he's like a genius, and he ended up by starting a prosthetic company that is extremely advanced. And he doesn't really go home that much. His life is his work. But he started going to this diner, and he's very intrigued with the waitress, and he brings his like friend, his best friend, who also like owns the company with him, and he just like, you keep looking at that waitress, why don't you ask her out on a date? And right at the second that he's going to ask her out, he almost does. Then he finds out that she has a daughter that's like sitting at the little bar, and after school doing her work, she's like 4 or 5, and she actually is also missing a leg, and she's not wearing her prosthetic. And so it's almost like an end for him to start talking to her, but he is very concerned with her daughter, Casey. She doesn't seem to want to wear her prosthesis, and he's just like, look, I can like have her custom fitted prosthesis and stuff. So again, gotta love a man who's like really good with kids. JT definitely was, but I don't know. Their relationship was just okay for me. Again, didn't have like quite the same magic as the first book. The first book was just, it was too perfect, and I was looking for that same magic for the rest of the siblings, and I just didn't get that. So this one was just a 3.5 star for me. Still a cute read, but nothing like that wowed me. Next, I picked up The Brood by Devney Perry. So this was the book. I don't know if any of you watched my stories, but the day that I posted my video on spiciness and everything, I read a couple of examples and to showcase things that I think are missing in a lot of the romance books, because authors focuses on, I need these characters to be dirty talkers, I need their relationship to be super spicy and super hot, and they tend to focus more on the physical attraction than they do with like an emotional connection. And I wanted to compare 2 different scenes where our characters first meet each other, and the one that I was disappointed in was actually The Brood. I did not like the way that these characters first met, or at least I didn't like the thoughts going through their mind when they meet each other. It was very physical, very lust driven. Not to say that I didn't like this book. I ended up by liking this book. The relationship did eventually work because we did get to the emotional meatiness of the story eventually, but that's not what the first impression felt like. This is an age gap, and it's also a best friend's younger sister. romance. Wilder Abbott, he is a widower and he's also a teacher. His best friend asks a favor because his little sister has been traveling around Europe for the last 4 years. She is coming home, but her next stop, she wants to be in Montana in their small town Calamity because her brother has hyped it up a lot. And she is an influencer, like a travel vlogger and stuff like that. And she never stays any longer than like 2 months or so in the same place. Her brother Danny kind of has ulterior motive, like, hey, I want you to check on her and make sure like she's good, she's a little flighty, maybe we can like convince her to come back home and stuff, like get a real job and all that jazz. Wilder doesn't want to. He's kind of a little bit of a recluse. He likes his peace and quiet. And so the same day that Danny requests for his sister, like, hey, can she just stay at your house instead of like getting a hotel or whatever, and basically kind of was just like, you owe me a favor, and Wilder's like, fine, she could stay. I guess I have to go grocery shopping for her because I don't have like food. Like what is a 20-year-old eat? Like, is she vegan or something? Like, I don't really, okay, I gotta go to the grocery store. Then he sees this beautiful woman in the grocery store, tattooed, and she's wearing shorty shorts, and he's noticing her tits and ass right away. And I was just like, why? And his dick was jumping, and I was just like, I hate it so much. Why? Because I know Tiffany Perry could do so much better than that. And so I just expected more, and I was just like, I hate the fact that this is what the hero was thinking about our heroine. And it bothers me almost even more in hindsight because I feel like the characters end up by having a real connection. Very opposites attract romance. He's very like stable, vanilla. She's exciting. She's tattooed. She wears like eclectic things. Like, they're just so opposite, but they work so well together. And I'm just like, I really like their relationship. And it's just so sad that we started off so lust driven in the beginning, and I was just very disappointed in that. So it wasn't bad, it just wasn't great. So I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I read a fanfic. I read Something Golden by Just a Lazy Writer. It's a Dramione fanfic. It's my favorite. Have I read any other type of fanfics besides Dramione? I don't think so. I have like a couple downloaded on my Kindle, but I'm really only interested in Dramione fanfics. This fanfic is one that kind of spans different time periods in their lives. So it kind of starts in Hogwarts. They do have a secret relationship going on, and then the war happens. They're kind of separated for a little while and they reconnect. There is a bit of an amnesia plotline to this one as well, so it kind of reminded me a little bit of Wait and Hope, which I really love that one as well. And of course, Draco being like a reformed Death Eater, there's more to the story about like his whole involvement with Voldemort and stuff like that. And I really like having like an older Draco who's post-war and he has to fight against this stigma of like what he had to do to survive. One of my favorite things about Dramione fanfics is, at least all the ones that I have read, Ginny is one of my favorite side characters because she almost always is playing the part of like a younger annoying sister to Draco. She's one of the most supportive characters of a Draco and Hermione relationship in all of the fanfics that I've read, and it's one of my favorite things to look forward to. If Ginny doesn't like Draco and act like a younger annoying sister that Draco's like, I don't want to like you, but I like you, and you're the only tolerable person in Hermione's friend group that I actually like really like to hang around with, like if it doesn't have that, I don't want it. I just really love that relationship with Ginny and Draco like a lot. So anyway, this one also had that, and I was just like, loved it. So yeah, this one was pretty good. It wasn't like amazing. I felt like there was a couple things that dragged the story down a little bit. We spent a lot of time with Draco during the war committing heinous acts, and I was just like, do we need to keep being in these scenes witnessing all this? Like, we get it, he does horrible things, but like, do we need to witness it all the time? It was a little bit graphic, which doesn't bother me, but I was just like, it just felt unnecessary. We didn't need to see this. We knew that he committed war crimes, okay? We don't need to see it all the time. So that dragged a little bit for me, but there were so many great scenes in this one. So yeah, it was definitely good. Also, I made this cover because I could not find a cover for Something Golden, and I don't just like to have just the title. I don't know. I think there's so many great Dramione fan art out there. The person who drew this is Incendio Sketch, and one of my favorite Dramione artists out there. Just chef's kiss, chef's kiss. Oof, I said I wasn't gonna be long-winded, but I am, sorry. Then I picked up On the Shore, which is the next book in the Cottonwood Cove series by Laura Pavlov. So this book is about the sister Brinkley. She is a sports reporter, and she's lost her job because this arrogant NFL quarterback got her kicked out of a press conference, and she ended up by getting fired after that. because he's literally the biggest name in football. So she's gone back to Cottonwood Cove to nurse her wounds and try to figure out, get another job. He is also in Cottonwood Cove because his agent owns a house there and he wants to get out of the limelight for a little while. And so they run into each other because this is a small town and her family is very well known. He thinks that she is stalking him and they have a run-in that is he's a little bit of an asshole in this situation. So this is an enemies to lovers type of romance. We go a little bit too hard on the enemies in my opinion in the beginning, but he's really not an asshole. There was stuff going on that kind of made him react the way that he did. And I actually really like the background for Lincoln. But again, we have a situation where he's literally in a coffee shop and he's being unobtrusive, nobody's really recognizing him, and then he notices a girl who's like bending over and he's like, that ass. And we have that moment and I'm just like, why do we have to have heroes just noticing just tits and ass? Like, I want the heroes to find the heroines attractive, but like, does it have to be the first thing that they notice about them? Like, you can still admire the body without being like, I want to bang that from behind. I can see her nipples and my dick is jumping in my pants. Like, I'm just so over it. Like, it's become almost a joke. When I see these types of first meetings or, you know, thought processes by either the hero or the heroine, because sometimes the heroines do it too, the guys still objectify the guys, you know, based on dick prints or whatever. Like, it just bothers me. It just bothers me so much because there's just so much more to a relationship than physical attraction, and I wish that it wasn't such a focus nowadays in romance. Just a little bit more balance. That's what I'm asking for. A little bit more balance, a little bit more romantic things happening in romances. That's what I asked for. So yeah, anyway, a little bit of a forced proximity because of the small town. They kind of get to know each other and he feels bad for costing her her job. So he offers her like this exclusive because he doesn't really do interviews. And so again, forced proximity, and the relationship ends up by being really cute. It was just okay though, like the story. I was a little bit frustrated with Brinkley when she was like interviewing for jobs toward the end. That's a bit of a spoiler, so I don't want to talk about that in great detail, but she frustrated me a little bit because I was like, this is so obvious and you're not seeing this. So anyway, I ended up by giving this one 3 stars. It was a good romance, but it wasn't like my favorite. Then, so I saw Gigi Reed's post a few days ago about this book by Loretta Chase, and I've only read Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase, and I was like, I need to read more by her. And apparently this book, Mr. Impossible, is kind of like The Mummy, which I love. The Mummy, I love Rick and Evie, like couple goals, and so I was like, yeah, that sounds like a fun time. I want to read a historical that has the Mummy vibes, but I like to read things in order, and this is the second book in a series, so I decided to pick up the first one, Miss Wonderful, and this is the Carsington family. So our hero, Alastair Carsington, he is kind of like a bit of a war hero. He's also injured, and after the war, he's kind of started hyper-focusing on his wardrobe. So he feels like a bit of a dandy, a bit of a fop when we first are introduced to him, and also we have this background. So apparently he's one of 5 boys, and his father, who's an earl, laments the fact that he has so many sons, and daughters would have been easier because they'd be less expensive to just marry off than like sons who kind of like constantly drain the funds. And Alastair has cost him a lot of money because not only is his spending on clothes just out of control at this point, but in the past he's fallen in love many times and very easily. And his father has had to pay off these women time and time again for one reason or another. So the father and the mother kind of have a conversation like, what are we going to do with Alastair? We kind of need to like force his hand. He needs to get married. He needs to take life seriously. He needs to get out of this funk after the war. You know, he's kind of burying himself in clothes and not focusing on life anymore. So like, what are we going to do? So the dad gives Alastair an ultimatum. He says, okay, so we're not going to support your lifestyle anymore. You're just like completely draining, you know, everything. So if you don't find an heiress to marry in 6 months, I'm going to sell the properties that I have saved for your brothers, and I'm going to use that money to pay for your lifestyle. So you're going to be costing your brothers their future if you continue in this way. Alastair very much loves his brothers. He doesn't want that to happen. So he kind of starts to have to get serious about life and stop falling in love with women so easily. He becomes like this very romantic person whenever he finds a woman that he's attracted to. So he's kind of gone into business with one of his friends that he was in the war with and who saved him. His friend has property that has like, they're doing coal mining and stuff, and they want to build a canal because that's going to help them transport coal different places. The only problem is the countryside that they want to build the canal through, the most prominent aristocrat in that area, is very against it. And so Alistair personally has to go there and try to like convince everyone to be on board with this and not oppose the canal. The prominent aristocrat has a daughter, and I actually really love, so Mirabelle is 31 years old. She is a spinster, but like a true spinster. My battery's dying. I'll be back in just 1 second. So Mirabelle is a spinster. She's also been in control of the estate for the past like 10 years. So her father is a recluse. He's also a botanist, and he's very focused on his plants, and he's a little bit not all there sometimes. So she's been taking care of the estate this whole time. So she's very business minded. Nobody really knows that she is doing all of this for her father. And Alistair has no idea that Mirabelle is the person that he actually has to convince, not really the father. The father is interested because he doesn't want the countryside spoiled, but Mirabelle's basically the one that is gonna fight against him. And of course, when they first meet, he's like, oh God, he's thinking these poetic thoughts about her, like literally composing sonnets about her. And he's like, no, focus. You cannot fall in love with like another woman. Like, you're here to do a job. You're supposed to be responsible. Stop thinking about her. And it's really endearing. And one of the things that like bothers him about Mirabelle, but also endears her to him, is the fact that she's always disheveled. Her hair is never really pinned in place correctly, so her hair is always falling down. She obviously has dresses made of expensive material, but they don't flatter her at all. And he's, again, a bit of a dandy, a bit of a fop. So like, he's always being very bothered by her dress, but it also intrigues him. So anyway, I really liked their relationship. I liked how headstrong Mirabelle was, and I also liked the way that she started to get to know the real Alistair and kind of got to the bottom of his trauma and his past experience and why he's behaving this way now. But she also frustrated me a little bit because she was a little bit too pig-headed toward the end. Like, I felt like we could have pulled back on that and started compromising a little bit earlier. She was a little bit too, there's just no solution and we just can't be together. And I was just like, but y'all can. You're just not trying hard enough. So she frustrated me just a little bit, but I really did like her character. So I ended up by giving this one 4 stars. So also I found this very interesting with Loretta Chase. This being a series about a family, she really does not focus on any other family members besides the main characters of the story. So while we're reading about Alistair and Mirabelle, I didn't even know his brothers' names because they're not part of the story at all. And we barely even see his dad and his mom in the story, only at the beginning and the very end. So like, I didn't know at all about his brothers, younger or older. So I didn't know what to expect from Rupert, the hero. Rupert is our Brendan Fraser character. He's our Rick O'Connell, and he's in Egypt. His father similarly is like, you need to have something to do. So I've gotten you a job in Egypt and you're gonna go over there and do something with your life. He's quick to get in fights and stuff like that. Rupert, very physical being. And immediately when he lands in Egypt, he pisses off the local like police force by getting to a fight with somebody who is basically kind of abusing like a peasant who already looks injured, so he steps in to intervene. It gets him in trouble and it gets him thrown in jail like immediately. And then our heroine, who is our Evie character, her name is Daphne Pembroke. She is a widow of some means. She's married very young to somebody who's much older than her, and she has a brother, Miles. Daphne is a linguist. She knows many different languages, and she's also very interested in deciphering hieroglyphics. Nobody has deciphered hieroglyphics yet, but she's working on it. But all of her expertise is being filtered through her brother because this is her passion, but of course women are just not expected to have jobs or have this type of interest, you know? So her brother is supposed to be the language expert and the genius when it comes to that, but it's actually her. And her brother just wants her to be happy, so he goes along with this. Her brother ends up by being kidnapped because there is a papyrus that was purchased and people think that it's going to lead to this treasure. And so they want the papyrus and they want Miles because they think that Miles will be able to interpret it. Daphne quickly figures out what's going on and she needs somebody to help her find her brother. She goes to his best friend and the best friend's like, oh yeah, I'll find your brother, but like you stay here. And she's like, I can't do that. Like I have got to go. So anyway, she gets word of that there's somebody, but that could possibly help her, but like he's in jail. She would have to kind of bail him out, just like in The Mummy, where Evie has to bail Rick out of jail. And when I tell you that the sparks fly between these two, I absolutely love it. It is exactly The Mummy vibes. It's adventurous, it's fun. Daphne's incredibly intelligent and smart. Rupert is incredibly intelligent and smart, but he disguises it by playing like a dumb brute on purpose. And I just love that. Oh my God. In the way that he just like is protective of her, but also just kind of like, you're very competent. He recognizes how smart and competent she is already. And it was chef's kiss perfect. I loved it. I give it 5 stars. So yeah, those are the books that I read during the month of September, sans my rereads, which I already said I reread Tide. I reread some podcast books like Using Feiho, which is an October episode, Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, also an October episode. I reread Heir to Seven Waters by Juliette Marie. I buddy read this with Crystal. I just absolutely love Juliette's fantasy world. The Seven Waters series is so phenomenal, and Heir to Seven Waters is one of my favorite in the series, so that was really nice to be able to read this with Crystal. Ever since we started reading the Seven Waters series, it's just something that I look forward to. It is a break from the normal romances, because I definitely wouldn't consider this like a romance book, but it does have a romantic storyline, so that satisfies the need for me to have like a romantic relationship in a story. But like the Celtic mythology and the fantasy elements that really focus on like Celtic mythology, it's just, I love it. So yeah, that was a good reread. And I also reread Wolf Song, which is one of my favorite books, honestly. It's so sweet. One of my favorite friends to lovers romances. So good. And then I also reread Blue-Eyed Devil by Lisa Kleypas. I was just in the mood for some Hardy Cates, and it did not disappoint. So that was really good. Really good time. All right, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you like it, give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe to get notified on any future videos that I do. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, life's better with a little HEA. Bye, guys.